If the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died. My first reaction was to let the world see what is happening in the United States of America. I wanted the world to see, and I knew that I could not tell anybody what I had seen. It was just too horrible.
One hot summer evening on August 24, 1955, 14-year-old Emmett Till was face-to-face with white cashier Carolyn Bryant. Bryant, a Mississippian native, being taught the discriminative ways of the deep rural South, would then have an encounter with the boy that to this day is clouded with rumors of what really happened. Till, a Chicagoan native, was taught to be incredibly aware of how he perceived life in Mississippi. His mother, Mamie Till-Mobley, who grew up in Mississippi, moved to Chicago in search of a better life for not only herself but for her son. She nurtured Emmett and taught him how to love, how to be a gentleman, to be kind and confident to those around him. But after insisting on visiting family in Mississippi, Emmett had to be taught to efface everything he grew up around. Widely speculated since that day in 1955, Till would then be in grave danger as Bryant's false accusations would fatally doom Emmett, as her husband and brother-in-law JW Milam and Roy Bryant would unremorsively and without hesitation take Emmett from his great-uncle's home, torture and beat Till within an inch of his life, and then murder him. His body would later be tied with a 150-pound cotton gin fan to his neck and then dumped into the Tallahatchie River. 3 days later, a fisherman would then discover Emmett's body, beaten so badly that it was unrecognizable. Along with the 3-day state of decomposition and beating, it was a horrific scene when found. After receiving his body, Mamie Till fought triumphantly to have her son sent back to Chicago. Upon seeing her son's mutilated face and body, she demanded an open casket funeral in his hometown so that, quote, the world can see what they have done to her baby. Over 10,000 residents of Chicago gathered to not only pay respects to Emmett, but to see what he had gone through. More notably, some fainted, puked, and flat out erupted in tears at the sight of Till's body. News outlets such as Jet Magazine published Emmett's face and body for millions to see in media. The murder of Emmett Till served as a revolutionary cause for something greater, the civil rights movement, and a renewed way for thinking in America. The battered and horribly disfigured face of Till in his casket is something we won't ever forget. Shortly after his murder, Milam and Bryant would be arrested and tried for the kidnapping and murder, but due to an extremely unfair stipulation of an all-white jury and 5 Sumner lawyers as defense attorneys who favored these jurors, the men would be acquitted. Since the men who murdered Emmett were let go and free from being tried again due to the double jeopardy rule, they took it upon themselves to sit down with investigative reporter William Bradford Huey and admit the entire thing in a written confession. The national outrage from this entire case was great, but what was greater was Mamie Till's courage to let the world see. It sparked not only a movement, but protesting and decisions that molded our country into what it is today. In this multi-part series, we'll be discussing the life and legacy of Emmett Till. But in this first episode, we will be going over 3 things. Number 1, the Mississippi Delta and its environment before Emmett arrived. Number 2, Mamie and Emmett's life. And number 3, the incident at Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. Remember the name. Remember the face. Remember the story. This is Season 2, Episode 1. What's Bryce talking about now? So, kind of start off strong, I want to read off a statistic from the Washington Post, also provided by the Equal Justice Initiative, a human rights organization based in Montgomery, Alabama, which opened the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in 2018 to honor thousands of lynching victims. From 1877, more than 4,000 black men, women, and children were lynched in cities and towns across the country. During that period, Mississippi recorded 581 victims, the highest number of lynchings recorded by state. And to kind of give some insight on what a lynching really is, it is sort of a mob killing. It's where a mob basically goes out, seizes someone, and well, most of the times it's often defined as a hanging from a tree. But obviously, if there is a mob involved and they seize someone and murder that person, that can be defined as a lynching. More often, these victims are hung, but the brutality of these lynchings, they also come from the photographs. There are so many pictures and images of dead bodies being hung on trees, and there are white mobs with people smiling and waving at the camera. A common perception of lynching can be defined as a mob killing that is primarily used with hanging, but other forms of lynching also come in people being shot, people being thrown off of bridges, people being dragged by cars. So lynching isn't only tied to just somebody being strung from a tree. There are more and more brutal and more horrendous forms of lynchings. The reality of lynchings really comes from the photograph that you see online. These photos of these black victims, mutilated bodies and charred bodies being on display for these white mobs to celebrate and jeer and also spit and ridicule. It really did set out a warning for other black people. When interviewed, most of these white people said that they either didn't care or they knew they were going to get away with it. So they carried on with the lynching anyways. So to kind of give more insight, imagine spending the last moments of your life being beaten and carried to a site to be hung or shot or dragged to death in front of a white mob that's celebrating the fact that you're gonna die for no apparent reason. It's terrifying. It's horrific. No one, and I really mean no one, should have to go through, no matter what the race is, nobody should have to go through the horror of just being carried out to your death, of being beaten and hung and just ridiculed and jeered the entire time while you're dying, while you're breathing your last breath, while you're just gasping for life, for air, for oxygen, while you're trying to just hold on. This is what we went through. This is what African Americans went through during these time periods. Just subjected to horror constantly, again and again and again and again, unremorsively, without mercy. So kind of getting more into the Mississippi Delta, I want to talk about the segregation and just the hostility that resided in the Mississippi Delta. I will not be getting into sort of like the numerical data on the Mississippi Delta. I'm very bad with numbers such as like per capita and stuff like that. I definitely need to do more research on per capitas and just incomes of certain states to really learn more about the financial status and conditions of some of these states. But let's get into the segregation of the Mississippi Delta. From the FBI report regarding Emmett Till's murder, it says, in 1955, the state of Mississippi was a segregated society, as was most of the South. After the Civil War, many states had enacted laws termed Jim Crow or Black Code to maintain a separation of blacks and whites in the use of certain public facilities. By 1907, the list of public places where segregation was mandatory included theaters, water fountains, streetcars, boarding houses, and other public institutions. So, whew, imagine just, and this is really what I was talking about when I was mentioning the surface level knowledge of racism, but it's still racism at the end of the day. Even when you're not able to go to your favorite movie theaters to go see your favorite movie, or even drink water from a certain fountain, I could possibly imagine that the African American water fountains back in the day were very disgusting, not really taken care of, while the white water fountains were sparkly clean and, pristine and always in great shape and condition. But just not being able to use your own freedom to enjoy your own hobbies, having to probably take an extra hour or extra hour and a half to go to a Negro movie theater or to a segregated movie theater just to enjoy your favorite movie, when you can just, I don't know, go to a regular movie theater and see it. But obviously that wasn't the case. Some more information from the FBI report states that in the Mississippi Delta, separate black and white public bathroom facilities, drinking fountains, restaurants, and other means of keeping the races were the norm. It was common for black persons to refer to white persons as Mr., Mrs., Miss, Sir, or Ma'am. However, it was out of the norm for a white person to refer to a black person in kind. So, sort of just treating us less than and not giving us the proper respect that we deserved, or even, required, because I guess we weren't human back then. But let's continue. A lot of blacks and a lot of black people avoided eye contact with a white person in fear of being harmed or being beaten, or even worse, being killed on the street, because many white people would resort to doing that if their pride led them, if their ego had overwhelmed them. So just the thought, just imagine walking on the sidewalk and you see a person of the opposite color. Your first instinct is to look down at your feet, not even dare to look up, not even to say hello or how was your day, sir? How's it going? Just to look down and even to some extent get off of the sidewalk or beg for forgiveness if you just so happen to bump into this person of the opposite color. This was the norm. This was life. This was just the complete lifestyle for a black person. I don't talk about this much, but whenever I go outside and I see anybody, my first instinct is to just say, nod my head and say, hello. Imagine me slightly making that mistake in the 1950s. I wouldn't even be alive. I wouldn't even be able to go home, because God forbid a person of the opposite color gets prideful, so much so to the point where they feel as if they have the need, they feel as if they have to resort to harming me if I dare look at them any type of way. If I just walk on the sidewalk and I just look at them, they feel the need to harm me, to hurt me, to kill me. This was the reality in the 1950s. This was the environment that Emmett Till was stepping into. We don't talk much about the environment that he was stepping into. And this is no offense to Mamie Till, God rest her soul. But the 14 years that Emmett Till lived, he was a majority of that, a large majority, I would say 95%, was in Chicago, where blacks and whites were similar, not all the way equal, but similar. You can walk on the sidewalk and say hi to a white person, start up a conversation. Yes, there were still lynchings in Illinois, but Illinois statistically held one of the most lowest records for lynchings in the United States back then. But you can go on the sidewalk and you can say hi to a white person. You can have a conversation with a white person. You can be yourself around a white person. You don't have to lower yourself. You don't have to think of yourself as less than. And that lifestyle in the Mississippi Delta was so ridiculous to me. Like, I never understood it, bro. I never understood it. Like, just the idea of not even being able to joke around or just be happy around, like, God forbid you be happy around somebody of the opposite color in the Mississippi Delta. It's crazy, bro. But getting back into it, quote, blacks avoided quote, when purchasing items from a white store owner, blacks did not normally place the money directly into the white person's hand. Instead, they would place the money on the counter. This exchange avoided skin contact between blacks and whites. Change would be returned to blacks without making skin contact as well. Are you kidding me? Like, oh my gosh, bro. God forbid I go purchase a item. God forbid I go purchase a item. And let's just say this phone case was a bag of chips, right? Let's just say I hand you this bag of chips and my arm accidentally touches your arm while the bag of chips is being exchanged. Does that mean I'm liable to be lynched? Does that mean I'm liable to be murdered? Does that mean I'm liable to be killed? Are you serious? Like, our last quote coming from the FBI report regarding Emmett Till's murder, but mainly the Mississippi Delta. In the Mississippi Delta, a de facto institution of separate justice was in place for whites and blacks. The white population could rely on the normal vestments of government and call on the local sheriff's department for assistance in criminal matters. This was not the case for blacks. The black population was dealt with in a manner which some historians have called Negro law, a system where the gravity of the crime was determined in large part by its impact on whites. Many of the older white and black persons interviewed and or interacted with during this investigation related the manner in which whites were to interact with blacks when problems arose. If a white person had a problem with a black person, the issue would be taken up with the black person's landowner, the person who owned the farm where the black person or that person's family sharecropped. The landowner would then take care of the problem by a number of means. These means included paying off of debts and other non-violent solutions, but also included beatings, whippings, and other uses of force. Much the same was done in the case of black-on-black crime/problems. Okay. Just reading this, I couldn't have lived back. Like, I just couldn't have. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I'm like, I'm speechless. I can't really say anything. I don't really have anything to say right now. It's very unusual for this type of podcast, but yeah. With that being said, let's just cut off of the Mississippi Delta and let's really get into who Emmett Till was and also who Mamie Till was in their relationship as mother and son while growing up in Chicago. Mamie Till was born Mamie Elizabeth Carthen on the 23rd of November in 1921 near Webb, Mississippi. Not long after her birth in the year 1924, Mamie and her mother, Alma Carthen, would then move to Argo, Illinois to join Mamie's father, Wiley Nash Carthen, who was already there. He was working for the Argo Corn Products Refining Company. Argo was a suburb of Chicago, a city in Cook County, Illinois, and was annexed by Summit in 1911. It was named, according to Wikipedia, the nearby cornstarch and baking powder manufacturing plant. The name Argo is still commonly used for many areas such as the high school, but Summit is the primary term. Mamie described her life in Argo as Little Mississippi. She thought highly of her mother Alma. Her house was dubbed the Ellis Island of Chicago for the sole reason that many black folks would settle there to adjust and find jobs while coming from Mississippi. For a 25-year period between 1950 and 1940, Alma's home in Mamie's town was a tiny but significant reason behind the doubling of Chicago's black population. As she continues, she says, quote, for us, it meant the joy of the familiar, of family and friends, and of course, runaway ambition. But there was that other half, the part that was more understood than talked about, and talked mostly between the lines of other talk around our dinner table. It was the part that was dominated by what people knew they had fled. Now, the Carthen family was one of many families that were a part of the Great Migration, the movement of 6 million African Americans out of the southern United States to the Midwest, West, and Northeast between 1910 and 1970. These movements were a result of deplorable economic status and racial tension in these southern states. Now, the main goal of these African American families was to escape the racial violence and to pursue more opportunities economically and socially. A quick background story about Mamie's childhood could be a playing factor as to why her family moved from Mississippi down to Chicago. When Mamie returned to Mississippi around the age of 12, she was ecstatic to see her grandparents and to also return to Webb. While coming across a drugstore on the small strip located in Webb, Mamie enters this drugstore, right? Immediately the atmosphere just shifts and all the attention is on Mamie, but not the attention that you would expect. These people in the drugstore were disgusted at the fact that someone like Mamie, someone the same skin color as Mamie, would walk through that door. A white man would then approach Mamie and ask her what she wanted. In her autobiography, she would tell the man 2 rolls of toilet paper and an ice cream cone. Her father was unaware of where she was at the time. In response, the man sort of narrowed his eyes at Mamie. Mind you, this is a 12-year-old girl. And the man, we don't know how old the man was, but obviously this was an adult. And he's sizing up this 12-year-old. He's trying to intimidate this 12-year-old solely based off of her skin color. Crazy. He asked where Mamie was from, to which she said Chicago. Mamie described her response by saying, quote, that always seemed to impress people when my grandparents would take me around and introduce me. And I was very proud that I was from Chicago. And I really love, just that courageousness from Mamie, even though at the young age that she was at, even in the oppressed place that she was in, the oppressed, segregated environment that she was in, she still held true to where she was from at the moment. She didn't, I guess, crumple under pressure and say, oh, well, I'm sorry, sir, I'm from, this, that, and the third. She doubled down on where she was from, and she was proud that she moved to Chicago for a better life, and she never changed her mindset based off of what somebody would say about her or based off of how somebody looked at her. She was never immediately molded into this icon of bravery the moment her son died. She already had this foundation of courageousness. She already had this foundation of knowing what she needed to do, being proud of where she was from, doubling down on that, standing on that. So I just love this specific moment on when the man asked her where she was from, and she didn't fall under pressure. She didn't crumble under pressure. Now, according to her autobiography, she continues, well, he just looked like he was about to spit as he collected himself. The man said, you know what? I'm going to give you that ice cream cone, but I'm not going to sell you no toilet paper. He turned his back on me, but he kept talking. You go on home. Use corn cobs like everybody else. And I was so unfamiliar with the way that, I guess, African Americans use certain items throughout their daily lives. Corn cobs is a very just unusual, like, it's so unusual, like it's very, very disgusting. The fact that you don't have the pleasure to purchase just a roll of toilet paper is insane to me. I knew Mississippi was, this is going back to the introduction. I knew Mississippi was bad, but I did not know Mississippi was this bad. The fact that you cannot purchase toilet paper for bowel movement is insane. Like, it's just so insane to me. And I really can't explain, or I really can't assume how Mamie felt in that moment, but I kind of want to put myself in her shoes. Like, I would feel so just upset. Like, the fact that I'm a different skin color than you, it doesn't make it justifiable for you to act a certain way towards me. It doesn't give you the right to, I guess, deny me something that every human needs. It doesn't give you the right to deny me just regular items just because I'm a different skin color than you. I can't really explain it, but it doesn't give you the justification to do that. I'm going to continue reading off of her autobiography. I drew my breath, preparing to say something I know I would have regretted. Some smart remark, because I mean, what did I know? I must have thought I was still in Chicago or something. But at that moment, I was made aware of just where I stood. My grandfather walked through the door. John Carthen, my daddy's daddy, was a well-respected man. He actually had his own land, with sharecroppers working for him. And there was a plantation store he owned where people could come and get whatever they needed, from cloth to grits to candy, everything of course except toilet paper. So when Papa Carr came in, the white man recognized him. Does she belong to you? The man asked. My grandfather smiled, gently placed his arm on my shoulder. Yes, sir, that's my baby. I did get my ice cream cone, as well as a tongue lashing from my grandfather once he got me on the other side of the street. He warned me never again to cross over by myself, and how I should never lose sight of him, and how I should always let him know when I moved away from him. He told me about the great danger that I had just faced, how I simply could have disappeared. And then what? He made me think about what Mama and Daddy would have thought, what they would have felt. Oh, that really shook me up. I mean, he just pounded the fear of every black person in the state of Mississippi into me. I would never forget that incident. And my goodness, that talk with Papa Carr. The lessons of that moment would always stay with me. In Mississippi, there were certain things that black people were denied by white people. The freedom of movement, the luxury of choice, and a roll of toilet paper. Whew, man. The scary thing about this certain incident is that, to me, it's very identical to what her son went through. The same situation in where he goes into the meat market, or I guess store, to kind of serve as a general term, and he's so unaware of how Mississippi law works. Mamie, I'm kind of trying to connect it. Mamie already had, I guess, that awareness of Mississippi law. She knew what she needed to do once she entered that drugstore. Be polite, be small, be humble. And the same law that she was taught, the same lecture from her grandfather, I could only assume that she tried to give that to Emmett as well. And it's just so scary because a mother going through the same thing, a mother experiencing this racial tension would always try to teach her son how to avoid, teach her son how to get through that situation and to survive and to really move on. And the reason that I told this specific story because it serves as a cautionary tale to the environment that was Mississippi. I can only imagine that Mamie probably told this story to Emmett as to warn him about the dangers of Mississippi. Mississippi wasn't that much different from when Mamie was a child as to now when Emmett was a child. It was still the same. It was still so much racism. It was still so much segregation. It was still so much aggression that plagued the entire state. And Emmett wasn't aware of that. So it's just having that connection in which Mamie, experienced that situation at the drugstore and Emmett also experiencing that situation at the meat market. It's just something to think about. Around 13 years old, Mamie's parents would unfortunately divorce, and as a result, Mamie would sort of overwhelm herself into her studies and her schoolwork. Her mother, Alma, was optimistic about Mamie's future and encouraged her to keep at the dedication to her academic succession. Mamie describes, at Argo Community High School, I was an A student and the first black to make the honor roll. I liked school. I liked it a lot, and I wanted so much to do well. Since things were so strict at home, mostly all I did was ever study anyway. And obviously, it was paying off in tough subjects like Latin and science. And that's where we're going to end the story of Mamie Till and her childhood. Now, let's go and move on to Mamie meeting Louis Till. Around age 18, Mamie would then meet Louis, a boxer hailing from New Madrid, Missouri. Now, at the time, Louis was described as a big, strapping man, sort of a charmer, but at times he could get very aggressive, especially with Mamie during their tenure of being together. Now, Louis Till was born on February 7th, 1922. He would end up being in a relationship with Mamie around age 18. The thing about Louis was that he loved boxing. That was one of his great passions. And he was also very sophisticated, but maybe to a point of being too sophisticated. He had a very stern look to his character. And every time you would, I guess, see Louis, it was always there. It always stuck. One of the main factors about Louis was that he was a charmer. He was very, very persuasive. But one of the bad factors about Louis was that he was very abusive. This was the primary characteristic about Louis was his abusiveness towards Mamie. There are many instances where Louis would physically abuse Mamie, mentally abuse Mamie, and it got to a breaking point where Mamie had to throw boiling, scalding water on Louis in order to send him a message of, I'm not going to take this anymore. So let's get down to that story. Now, Mamie was aware that most women at Argo dropped out for the sole purpose to date, and Mamie, now at age 18, hadn't even dated or danced with a boy. She felt persuaded to experience that romance, that love, and in that journey was when she met Lewis. Now, Lewis, who aforementioned was from Missouri, moved out to Argo to work at the corn products company, same as Mamie's father. For their first ever date, Mamie and Lewis went to Berg's drugstore, a few blocks down from Argo Community High School. The policy of the store was that they served but did not seat African Americans. The two bought banana splits, but instead of following policy, Lewis demanded that they sit down and enjoy their meal. Mamie thought the idea was crazy, and according to her autobiography, she says, "What was he thinking? I realized he was new in town, but he was about to get us into some real trouble. Lewis very casually pointed me in the direction of the booth by the window, and we sat there and began eating our banana splits. I could hardly enjoy mine. I was so nervous. Just as I was about to taste a spoonful, Mr. Berg himself rushed out to our booth. He was so upset." Now, kind of calling back to Lewis's stern personality, at the time his charm began to show. In this certain circumstance, it came with defending Mamie. Lewis would then stand up and intimidate Mr. Berg, not saying a single word at all. Berg threatened to tell Mamie's mother, but it didn't matter. Lewis made his mind up, and he wanted to stay in that booth. This action would then motivate other black customers to order in booths and comfortably defile the policy Mr. Berg had once set out. This certain action for Mamie was something admirable, but her mother Alma thought differently. Alma wanted Mamie to end the relationship, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But Mamie saw absolutely nothing wrong with Lewis's bravery and confidence within himself. But Lewis's assertiveness would then clash with Mamie's innocence as he would catch her speaking to another boy in front of her house. Lewis would then make such a scene and was so angry that Alma would then come out and scold them both. Mamie particularly was against her mother's scolding, as she felt that she was a grown woman now, free to make grown woman choices, which meant she could be with Lewis and did not have to take orders from Alma. So, in a sense, Alma's scolding basically backfired, and Mamie thought that she could really make her own decisions now. She wasn't a child. She wasn't this little girl that had to take up for every single decision that her mother wanted her to do. And by that time, she believed that she could even marry Lewis, and that's exactly what happened. In Alma's living room on October 14th, 1940, Mamie and Lewis would then marry. After the wedding, Lewis would then move in with Mamie and the Gaineses. Mamie was working at the Coffee School of Aeronautics, and Lewis was still at the corn products. Shortly after marrying, the two would move in with Alma and her new husband, Mr. Tom Gaines. But as the newlywed couple were settling in, Lewis began to grow resentful of Mamie's close relationship with her mother. Alma and Mamie were both God-fearing women. Although Alma was strong, strict, and sometimes stern, she was very protective over her relatives, especially her only child, Mamie. A certain situation in where a church officer attempted to suggest sexual advances towards Mamie at a young age brought out a lesson of love from Alma. Around age 14, young Mamie and her dear friend Ollie Colbert head down to a local neighborhood dance. Alma then sets out a curfew for the young women. Be home by 9 o'clock, nothing after. The dance didn't start until 8, so Mamie settled for just 1 hour, but she described it as glorious. After the dance, Mamie gets a tap on her shoulder, and it's the young church officer, and he tells Mamie that her mother asked him to take her home. Mamie thought the boy was handsome and followed along. But then, after a few minutes in the boy's car, the church officer started to deliberately make the wrong turns. Long way up the street, down into the white neighborhoods, it seemed as if the boy wanted something. And turns out, he did. It was something sexual. He made propositions to Mamie that she never even heard of. She never even thought about. Mamie told the boy that she would not, absolutely not accept his advances and also threatened to tell her mother, to which the boy responded, quote, "She won't believe you." As the boy became more stronger on the Mamie, Mamie threatened to scream, to which the boy jerked back, and Mamie then ran out of the car into her home. Man, wow. It just seems like the more I explain stories about Mamie, it's so much courageousness out of her. The story with the cashier at the drugstore, the story with the church officer. It seems like, and I'm not trying to like connect the dots to some big, characteristic, but it just seems like throughout Mamie there was a pattern of challenges and a lot of obstacles that she had to go through, especially considering that a lot of these challenges considered standing up and defending herself. It's just something to think about. You know what I mean? I don't want to get too much into it, but it was just something to think about. Like the fact that there were so many stories about, and there are a lot of stories in the book that I'm referencing, Death of Innocence, that I haven't gotten to. There was a story about a deacon that also tried to come onto Mamie at a very young age, and she had to speak up and she had to defend herself. Just stories like that where Mamie had to show that she was strong, to portray her confidence in herself, and to portray that she wasn't going to take anything from anybody. I really love that about Mamie. And I also love that about Alma, considering that after the situation, Alma said that she was going to pray on it. Mamie described it later on as her mother never really teaching her the bad side of people, never really teaching her what people were capable of doing, negatively speaking, like the negative things that people were capable of doing. And everybody has their own way of teaching their children society and teaching their children societal issues. But I feel like with Alma, it was sort of like protecting her child from really the bad side of people, considering the curfew, considering just the strictness of Alma. It wasn't bitterness that was a result of that. It was pure love. You know what I mean? It was pure love. So yeah, that was just something to think about. Going back to Louis resented Mamie and Alma's relationship because he was an orphan. Also harping on that, a lot of people, when I read this, my mind was kind of 50-50 on how I should feel. Being an orphan is something that I would never, ever wish on a child. Most children, when being in these foster homes, they don't immediately get adopted. They have to wait for a few years. Most of them wait a few years and a few years and a few years. And some of these foster care systems are very abusive. So it's just, there's a lot of trauma that comes with being in a foster care system, especially if you knew your parents and you knew the reason why they gave you up. It adds on a lot of trauma and it adds on a lot of pressure and anxiety to that child. But what I will say is this: there are other ways to channel that resentment instead of taking it out on your wife, man. Like, oh my gosh. Like, it was just like taking it out on your wife and her mother is not the way to go about it. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the way to go about it at all. So I'm going to continue reading There will be times where Mamie will resort to Alma for help with certain tasks or advice, and this will really bring Lewis to a high level of jealousy. And later on, Lewis would not be present when little Emmett was born on July 25, 1941. Not being present for your own child's birth is, it's petty in my eyes. There could be a lot of reasons why Lewis wasn't present for Emmett's birth. Number one could be the fact that he resented Mamie and Alma. Number two could just be the fact that he probably didn't care. But like still, even with the plethora of reasons why Lewis didn't show up, you're supposed to show up. It's your child, dude. Like, it's your baby, man. Like, I feel like no matter what the situation, if I was in Lewis's shoes and my baby was due to being born on this specific date, I would basically clear out almost everything that I had to do in order to make that birth, in order to be there for my child. Like, conceiving a child, giving birth to a child is one of the most beautiful things in the world. And the fact that you missed it it's just inexcusable. You know what I mean? Mamie would describe birthing Emmett as extremely painful, but after hearing another woman cursing up a storm and berating the man she'd had sex with, it seemed as if Mamie forgot her own problems and pain. Cook County Hospital, the hospital Emmett was born at, served black people but not particularly well. When seeing pregnant and in labor Mamie, the nurses didn't immediately... Oh, whoa, mush mouth. Crazy. Let me start over. When seeing pregnant and in labor Mamie, the nurses didn't immediately treat this as an emergency. Once again, kind of calling back to the, segregation rules. It's just like you see a pregnant woman and she just so happens to be African American and you don't want to assist her to the fullest extent. You should be fired. But let's continue on. When looking at Emmett, she noticed he was scarred on his forehead and his face looked distorted. Emmett was a breech baby. Mamie's reaction caused little Emmett to cry, but she comforted him. That was the first connection as mother and son between Emmett and Mamie, and for years to come, it would be a lot more love. Now, around this time, doctors would tell Alma, who was there for emotional support with Mamie's birth, that Emmett would have permanent injuries and should be placed in a special physical treatment facility. However, Alma and Mamie refused and believed that Bobo, the nickname given while still being carried by Mamie, could recover. One particular incident is when Lewis comes home drunk and finds Mamie enjoying some greens and a pot of chili that Alma had sent while keeping Emmett. At the time, the two had their own apartment in Argo. It was tiny, but it was something. Lewis had lost a dice or maybe a poker game while gambling and needed someone or something to take his anger out on. Unfortunately, it was Mamie. While eating her greens, Lewis would demand her not to eat them. She brushed him off, thinking it was another one of his drunken rants and something to not be alarmed by. But before she could finish her greens, Lewis would then slam Mamie to the floor and choke her until she was unconscious. She would then wake up with Lewis gone and a soreness on her throat. She decided really in that particular moment, in that specific moment, there was no going back. And there was no reconciling. There was no communicating. There was no making up with Lewis. She needed to do something. This would then prompt Mamie to fill a pot with boiling hot water, take a poker and burn it and turn the lights off. She wanted Lewis to pay for what he had done. When Lewis would return, he would call out for Mamie, so gently. It seemed as if he was genuinely sorry for what he had done, but Mamie was smarter than that. She would then throw scalding water onto Lewis, and he ran out, leaving with a blood-curdling scream. He ran to Alma's, where Alma helped out by peeling his shirt from his back, along with his skin. For a God-fearing woman like Alma, it was really the least she could do. She would then move back in with Alma, but this did not stop Lewis from continuously violating the order. Times where he would confront Mamie on the street, begging to rekindle their relationship. Times where he would argue with her. It was all just too much. This would then lead to court, where Lewis was given two choices: go to jail or be sent to the army. Lewis would choose the army, and for a while, Mamie didn't speak to him or see him until he returned on Thanksgiving. Mamie would let Lewis in, and for a few moments, Lewis had straightened up his act. Spending time with Emmett, spending time with Mamie, there was some improvement to the character of Louis Till. He even negotiated with Mamie about receiving some of his military pay. But this family joy quickly ended when the military police showed up and told Mamie Lewis had gone AWOL. For those who don't know what AWOL means, it means being absent without leave. So Lewis basically violated his military law, and they ended up shipping him out. So, I don't know how to feel about this. So Lewis violates his military law, but it is for the sake of his family. He wants to see his family. He wants to see his child. He wants to see his wife. And I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of 50-50. Obviously, you can't just violate you can't just violate laws in the military. That comes with an extreme legal punishment. But it was for the sake of his family. He at least wanted to see his family, and it kind of gives me a pattern of Lewis. Like 1 second he's this family loving guy. He's this man who wants to care for his family. He wants to care for his wife. Who wants to be there. But at the same time, he has these emotional issues to where he gets angry a lot. He has a lot of hostility built up, and he doesn't know how to control that, so he takes it out on his family. So, I mean, it's really, really confusing. Lewis, for me, his character, Lewis to me was very confusing. I'm not gonna call him a character. That's weird, but for me, it was just very confusing because 1 second he's just so in tune with his family life, and then another second he's abusing his family. He's not there for his family. He's physically harming his wife. He's not there for Emmett. He's absent. So, I mean, yeah, it's just very confusing for me. Yeah. Emmett would actually take his first trip to Mississippi in October of 1942 with his grandmother Alma in Money of LaFleur County. Alma was there to support her sister Elizabeth Wright, who was giving birth to her 9th child. Now, for the most part, Mamie's family overwhelmed Emmett with love and affection. The baby that Mamie saw in the hospital drastically changed over time, with his appearance changing from ocean blue eyes and blonde hair to sandy hair and hazel eyes. Mamie described him as the cutest little boy. Furthermore, to Emmett's personal life, Emmett and Mamie were really like brother and sister, with Emmett pulling pranks on Mamie like hiding under the bed and scaring her. But instead of scolding little Bobo, Mamie would just give him a hug. For Emmett and Mamie, their relationship went beyond mother and son. It was a very special bond that really just couldn't be broken. Emmett's family was very huge, as well as his friend group. Some uncles in the family would take Emmett uptown just to really spend time with him and to also give him ice cream as a treat. Emmett's cousins would even take him out every Saturday to Argo. It felt as if the family was fighting over Bobo's presence, and it quickly shifted into what Mamie would call the Emmett shift. Relatives would take turns driving Emmett out to places like the Brookfield Zoo, the Riverview Amusement Park, and the goal was to really show Emmett the world and to entertain him, and they succeeded in doing so. While Emmett was enjoying life, being the center of attention, fun-loving toddler that he was, Mamie would have to come to terms with something tragic. In 1945, Mamie discovered Louis Till's military pay abruptly stopped. Mamie would then receive a telegram informing her that Louis was dead. Mamie, so overwhelmed with disbelief and shock, collapsed while reading. The Army would then return Lewis's personal items, among them being a silver ring with the initials LT engraved with them, along with the date May 25th, 1943. This would then be shared and eventually given to Emmett, playing a very significant role in Till's story. It would later be known that Lewis was accused of the rape of 2 women and the murder of a third in June of 1944. Till and another African-American private, Fred McMurray, were found guilty and then hanged. Mamie would say in her autobiography to end her tale of Lewis, quote, "I realized that Emmett was the one thing that gave meaning to Lewis's life. He hadn't been a good husband, hadn't been a good father, and seemed to do his best to show the world that he wasn't a good person. But Emmett was his singular achievement, his one accomplishment, and in the end, perhaps his only reason for being." Wow. Um okay. Mamie is a strong woman. Um like the ability to talk about somebody like who has done so much to you in a negative sense, but talk about them with so much respect. Like I feel as if this was the best way she could talk about Lewis, even though there really wasn't anything, I guess, positive about him from what we hear. Like besides standing up for Mamie at the drugstore, really that was the only tale of Lewis Till that we really know that could be perceived as positive. It's really it's kind of heartbreaking to see some stuff like this, to hear some stuff like this. Just the fact that Mamie really, like, during her history of husbands, it seemed as if most of them weren't genuinely looking out for Mamie, genuinely being there for Mamie, being there for her son. Lewis Till is a primary example. There's going to be another husband in this tale that's going to be a primary example. But just like, wow. This quote really just, it hit me hard. Cause like, yeah, it's like, I don't have any words. It just really hit me. It really did. It really did. So there is a lot of confusion and speculation around the certain marriage, and also with the death of Lewis. Private James Thomas Jr. Would be granted immunity to testify against Lewis and Fred McMurray. He testified that Till and McMurray only took 20 minutes to plan the heinous crime. After police would find an envelope at the crime belonging to the address of McMurray, he would then confess to authorities that Till would lead the charge to the murder and rape, saying that whoever turns back, he will shoot them on sight, no hesitation. There is still debate on whether Lewis committed the crime or not. So moving on from Mamie and Lewis's relationship, we focus back to young Emmett, who is at the time in 1946 starting kindergarten. Emmett made friends at his school, named Argo School, but an arrival of a distant cousin would then change Till's life. The Parker family, who migrated from Money, Mississippi in 1947, would include Hallie Mae Parker, who was Alma's niece, her husband, and 3 young boys, William Parker Jr., William, and Milton. William Parker Jr. would become a very imperative part of Emmett's life. They would then become an inseparable duo. Wheeler was 2 years Emmett's senior and was new to Argo. He recently attended a one-room schoolhouse in Money. Emmett would sometimes go fishing with Alma and bring Wheeler along. A funny story involved fishing in the Des Plaines River, and in this outing, Emmett would catch a fish and yank it out, but the fish got dirty. Now, one of Emmett's pet peeves at the time, according to Mamie, was that he couldn't stand dirt on anything. So Emmett would then pick the fish up and attempt to clean it. The fish would obviously end up escaping Emmett's hands and wiggling back into the water. Now, even with the fish escaping and losing his catch, Emmett would laugh with Wheeler, and that was really the primary word to describe their friendship. With all this info about Emmett, we would tend to think at this time there was really no end to his laughter and fun joking. But the summer Emmett turned 6, it was for a moment. The usually energetic Emmett would then be completely out of it and basically deflate when he was not outside. Mamie thought this was completely out of the ordinary, and so did Alma. Emmett's temperature would then begin to increase rapidly at night. Alma and Mamie would blame each other for Emmett's fever and his tiredness, but it would become more serious. Alma and Mamie would then apply remedies such as goose grease and hoof tea to Bobo, but it made his condition even worse. Mamie would then call in a doctor for a house call. This is when Mamie received terrible news. Emmett had been diagnosed with polio. Mamie felt nauseous and almost fainted. Mamie would describe polio as the worst thing that could happen to you back then. It didn't kill you, but it could take your life away from you just the same. Mamie was recommended by the doctor to take Emmett to the hospital immediately, but Mamie could not get anyone to drive them, presuming that no one, absolutely no one at the time wanted to contract the disease. Even an ambulance turned down Mamie's request. They were getting desperate and were in immediate need of assistance. Luckily, a police car would transport the family to the contagious disease center. Mamie would describe her situation like this. Quote, "This was pure agony for me. We had no way of knowing what to expect. All we had was a vision of what might be in store. In those days, you would see the casualties everywhere. Children, mostly in iron lungs because their own muscles had failed them. Wheelchair-bound children whose legs had shriveled or with different forms of paralysis. And there was my son. What was to become of little Emmett? I had defied the doctors who told me he would be crippled for life following the complications at birth. We got through that. Now there was this." For 2 weeks, Emmett spent his time at the center and was released under quarantine. No one could come see him except Mamie and Alma. Lamorse would also help out, and the family appreciated that. Mallory was actually very connected with Alma, and she referred to him as Sergeant Mallory. He was also respected by more family members and named one of Mamie's favorite husbands. Emmett had started to show signs of improvement. There was no brain damage or issues with his body or limbs. Finally, on one of Emmett's visits, the doctor put Emmett off of quarantine and discharged him, the whole ordeal lasting 30 days. After this, Emmett was back to his energetic ways, up and ready to be himself again. Now, although Emmett's polio bout wasn't the worst, it left him with some muscle damage, a speech impediment in which Emmett would stutter real bad. Mamie would say that nobody could really comprehend Emmett other than her and Alma. This stutter would get really bad when Emmett was excited or under pressure and nervous. His ankles were also weaker than usual, which led to him having to wear a special support shoe. Alma in particular was devastated by this, considering that she valued speaking skills. Alma's aunt, Rose Taliaferro, who worked in the political area, was a grammatical genius. She always corrected someone when they said something incorrectly and meticulously appreciated grace and first impressions. Alma was heavily influenced by this and did not want Emmett to fall behind. So her and Mamie began taking Emmett to clinics and providing speech therapy. It was a slight help, and the doctors would even say Emmett would outgrow a speech defect. Now, moving further into Emmett's friendship with cousin Wheeler, Wheeler would describe Emmett as outgoing, a prankster, and a natural-born leader. On most occasions, Emmett was the center of attention. Growing up, Emmett tasked himself with paying jobs such as helping the milkman or delivering coal in Argo, while at the same time maintaining his childlike senses. Mamie would express her view on this, calling Argo, quote, "the land of milk and honey," a town of grand opportunities, and Emmett was influenced by the people who was a part of this migrant land, people dominating the landscape, working whatever jobs they could, making a name and paving their own way. Later on in 1948, Mamie would start a new job as a typist for the Social Security Administration, and in 1949, grandmother Alma would marry Harry Spearman, her third husband, and moved to Chicago, while Mamie and Emmett stayed behind in Argo. Life was a bit different from Mamie, considering that she was always huddled under her mother for a large majority of her life. In 1950, 9 or 10-year-old Emmett would take his second trip to Mississippi, and around this time, a kid Emmett's age and in Emmett's environment is still probably misinformed and unaware of how Mississippi worked at the time. The laws were backwards, barely any equality in unification of the blacks and whites. This showed the most when Emmett would use a hammer while on a white man's plantation while being accompanied by his great aunt Elizabeth, great uncle Mose Wright, who would both play very important parts in Emmett's story. The white man would ask for his hammer back, to which Emmett suggested that he just go get another one. It was a simple request, but Mississippi law takes offense to that. Now, I'm not referring to Mississippi law as the legal law, but the moral law. What they already I would say what they already established, as in how you would behave if you were black. Now, Alma, who was also there, would quickly escort Emmett off the plantation before anything could escalate any further. So around this time, young Emmett was still learning to adapt to the Mississippi way of life. But for a Chicago native like him, it was hard. It was difficult. The fact that the standard as a black individual was to lower your self-value is beyond me. To belittle yourself just for the sake of survival is beyond me. Around this time period, as aforementioned, Mamie and Lamorse would depart, and Emmett was again in need of a father figure. Argo, I guess, wasn't to Mamie's liking in standards of partners, so due to her cousins Ruby and Juanita's suggestions, Mamie and Emmett would move to Detroit. Her father had also moved there after divorcing Alma, but it would be a chance for them to rekindle their relationship. Mamie had not seen her father, who went by the name John now, in a couple of years. Her father had also moved there after divorcing Alma, but it would be a chance to rekindle their relationship. Mamie had not seen her father, who went by the name John now, in multiple years. John had never seen or spoke to Emmett, but was excited to meet him. Mamie and Emmett would move in with John and his new wife, Annie. John had never seen or spoke to Emmett and was excited to meet him. Mamie and Emmett would move in with John and his new wife, Annie. Furthermore, Mamie would still be a typist, just in a new setting at the Fort Wayne Introduction Center. She worked 7 days a week, and was subjected to lengthy hours. There was little time to care for Emmett, but John would step up and take care of Emmett, bonding with him along the way. He also bonded with Mamie, step by step, rebuilding what was lost back then. Now, the only issue that stood in between the family was the thought of Annie having a full house. Annie was, according to Mamie, as proud and snobby as she needed to be. She tolerated Emmett, but was easily irritated by his childness, by his energy. A lot of innocent freedom Emmett was able to immerse in when in Argo, it was very limited when he was in Detroit. She spoke to John about this, and in order to appease his wife and not to stir up any trouble, he told Mamie he would arrange for them to move in with a family called the Harrises, to which he knew very well. Now, to Emmett's luck, the Harrises were very fond of him and welcomed him like he was their own child. Mamie recalled that they basically adopted Emmett. For a while, Emmett was reminiscent of his life back in Illinois. The Harrises would take him to movies, ball games, and it was very special for him. While that was going on, Mamie would still be determined to find a lifelong partner, and once again, her supportive cousins, Ruby and Juanita, came through and introduced her to Mr. Pink Bradley, a 27-year-old World War II veteran from Arkansas. Bradley worked for Chrysler and was doing well for himself. He was a very, very wealthy man. He would take Mamie on many trips like horse riding, amusement parks, things of that sort, right? But Emmett, now at the time, was unhappy with his current environment. Now, a regular mother would have just told Emmett to deal with it, or to at least be somewhat comfortable with their new life. But Mamie wanted the best for her son and was generous enough to move back to Argo with his Uncle Kid and Aunt Marie. Now, Mamie missed Emmett the second he left and saw his departure as temporary. She planned to bring him back to Detroit when she could find her own place. Meanwhile, her relationship with Pink was reaching new heights. The attention, the love, the infatuation, it was so positively overwhelming for Mamie. She decided that after only a few months, they would get married. On May 5th, 1951, the wedding was official. Alma brought Emmett down to Detroit for the wedding and was happy for Mamie, but her faith and her steadfastness in God told her that Mamie and Pink were unequally yoked. Not long after, Pink will lose his job as soon as they settled in. Now, Mamie details this certain part as Pink not even looking for job opportunities after the fact. He would just lie around and order Mamie to fix him food. One particular day when Mamie was in charge of cooking a big dinner for Pink, his friends, and her own relatives, she would accidentally burn multiple parts of her body while using a pressure cooker. After being rushed to the emergency room by Pink, she told Pink that she might not be able to make dinner. Pink did not take that well. He told Mamie to hold to her promise and her obligation to make the food regardless of the condition she was in. Wow. Wow. Bro. Wow. That's like, dude, really? Your wife just experienced, I would say, probably third-degree burns from cooking dinner that you ordered her to do, right? After a pattern of you just ordering her around to cook you food and you not looking for a job, right? And now that she's in the emergency room and she's trying to get better and she's actually physically unable to cook the dinner, you're mad? Like, you couldn't find anybody else to cook for you. You couldn't find no other relative. You couldn't find no other friend. You couldn't find nobody down the block. Couldn't find nobody down the street. You couldn't locate anybody to finish what Mamie was doing. Is like, my head is starting to hurt. My head is starting to hurt, man. Yeah, that's crazy. Mamie was still determined to see Emmett, visiting him once a month. She discovered that Emmett was having a very good time and was learning to be satisfied without her presence. Not that Emmett didn't miss his mom, though. In November, Alma would purchase a 2-flat home located on South St. Lawrence Street in Chicago. She offered the upstairs apartment to Mamie. Mamie accepted and moved back to Chicago, with Pink following along. Mamie would have to find another job at the Social Security Administration, and Pink would be hired at the corn products. So this is like the third member of Mamie's life that will work at the corn products. It seemed like, I don't think I did enough research on the Argo corn products company, refining company, but it seems like a lot of close members of Mamie's family will work there. A lot of African Americans. Emmett would start 5th grade at James McCosh Elementary, which was around a 3-minute drive from the apartment. The neighborhood Emmett would live in for the rest of his life was a mecca for African Americans. Black businesses thrived and showcased success. Pharmacists, tailors, barbers, and beauty salons were all led by black people. Emmett and Mamie also lived closer to Alma, so that was good as well. They were happy about that. Emmett and Pink's relationship, it was mediocre. It was good, but they weren't close. So it was like a 50-50. It was an kind of relationship. Pink was okay in Chicago. He was maintaining that life with Mamie and Emmett, but on the weekends he would be more eager and more happy to take Mamie's car and visit Detroit to see his close relatives and friends. Okay. When returning, he wouldn't make conversation with Mamie. It was a simple "I'm hungry" when he entered the house, and then he would end up going to sleep. And this was weekend after weekend. It was basically the same thing. Their relationship seemed very stagnant, and it wasn't going anywhere. That was until Christmas in 1952. When Pink would come home that night, he had some liquor, and he made a call to another woman. Mamie was curious as to what he was doing. And unfortunately, to Mamie's devastation, he was planning a date with another woman. Man, you gotta feel for Mamie. Oh my goodness. You really have to feel for Mamie. This is her, so it was Louis Lamorse, and now Pink, this is her third husband. This flew Mamie into a rage, and she confronted the woman who was named Margaret over the phone. By the time Pink would go to Detroit and come back home, his clothes were basically just sprawled on the front yard, and the locks were changed. So at that point, Mamie had made up her mind, and she just did not want to be with Pink anymore. Man, I can't really say anything. Let's move on. This marked the third marriage Mamie had that would end in heartbreak, but this brought her and Emmett closer to bring it to a more positive light. They looked out for each other and would increase their loyalty to one another. While her third marriage ended, the presence of Pink Bradley did not. One night, Pink stopped by and Mamie let him in. At this time, they were separated and he wanted to see Bobo after hearing that he was sick. But before he got to Emmett's room, he began to threaten Mamie, coming up with scenarios about what he ought to do to her. Now, Mamie said that she could handle it and that she thought Pink would leave. But all of a sudden, Emmett was standing in the doorway with a butcher's knife. Oh. He talked slowly and told Pink that he needed to leave for bothering his mother. He told Pink that if he did not leave, that he would cut him. Emmett was 11 at this time. Wow. This is a very bold kid. Yeah. Pink hesitated for a bit. He was sizing up Emmett, and he was thinking about possibly harming him to prove a point. Pink was described as a very prideful man, very stubborn. Luckily, Pink left, and that was the last Mamie saw of him. This particular incident would increase Mamie and Emmett's growth as mother and son even more. They would then develop a partnership where Emmett would take on some more house responsibilities like cooking. According to Mamie, Emmett's favorite dish was pork chops and peppered corn. Now, Emmett would put, just a lot of pepper on his corn. Mamie would basically call it like just black corn. Like it was just a lot of pepper on it. Along with cooking, Emmett would take care of cleaning the house, sweeping, mopping, painting. Nothing really held him back from taking care of the house while Mamie had her new job at the U.S. Air Force. Emmett also took care of himself by being very meticulous about his clothing. He favored a straw hat, dress pants, and shoes, and some dungarees as well. Mamie would say about Emmett, quote, "In between taking care of more and more things for me, he made sure that he took care of his own things." Emmett was beginning to become a teenager and took on these certain responsibilities not just because of his age, but for the sake of his mother's being. In 1953, the last man to marry Mamie would enter her life while she was getting a manicure at a South Side salon. The shop was closed, but Mamie found out that there was a barbershop named Polk's across the street. The owner, Mr. Polk's wife, was a manicurist. While there, a friend would point out that there was a man staring at Mamie, but pretending to read the newspaper. That was a great tactic, my guy. Really good tactic. Mamie appreciated this. Oh, sorry, I'm skipping. His name was Gene Mobley, and he was a barber. A friend introduced Mamie to him, and at first she wasn't impressed by his character, but he didn't give up on getting to know Mamie. He would offer her free hair appointments as well as nail appointments, also pitching in for Emmett for a haircut. Mamie appreciated this, but she still didn't look at Gene as her type to be with. After a month of returning to Polk's, Gene would invite her to dinner, but she didn't see it that way. She recalled Gene ordering 2 steaks but not eating his. He seemed nervous, but Mamie wasn't. She didn't see this as a date. It was just a friendly invite to dinner. But she would get to know him more. He worked at the Ford Motor Company, in which he would manage heavy machinery and parts of cars, then return to his job at Polk's. Over time, Mamie would begin to have more affection towards Gene and be more intimate with him. Gene and Emmett will also develop a close bond. Emmett will also be there when Gene needed an errand ran. Gene will also take Emmett to baseball games with his brother Wealthy Mobley and spend time shopping with him. In a way, Gene was similar to Mamie due to the fact that he was also separated from his spouse and had to raise his children on his own. Emmett would begin to share more with his new father, Gene. He shared with Gene that he wanted to become a professional baseball player, and it was Emmett's passion. One instance in the 1954 Argo School Championship game, Emmett had volunteered to play even though he was no longer a student. Mamie would write that Emmett wasn't that good of a ball player. He was okay for what it was, but he wasn't the best. You know what I mean? He was mediocre. There were 2 outs left in the last inning, and Emmett was up to bat. Now, considering that Emmett was standing at 150 pounds at 5'4", he was chubby, he was slow. But he gained enough power to crack the ball into right field. He attempted to round the bases completely, but was tagged and suffered a loss. Emmett would also share about his life at Argo as well. He had a plethora of friends that recalled his humorous ways. People like Wheeler, William Milton, and some friends like Donnie Lee Taylor and Lindsey Hill. Emmett would be their main source of entertainment with laughter and jokes, sharing sketches from some of his favorite comedians like George Gobel, Abbott and Costello, and Dean Martin. Even on some occasions, Emmett would pay people to tell him jokes. That's crazy, right? You pay your friends to tell you jokes just to laugh, just to get a good laugh. I'd never heard of that before. Giving your friends some money just to laugh. That's insane. One friend he would exclusively pay. There's mush mouth. Oh, I'm sorry. One friend he would exclusively pay was Donnie Lee. Late in the neighborhood, Emmett and Donnie would swap jokes and exchange dollars. Fun fact, Donnie even had a stutter like Emmett's. For Emmett, his stuttering sort of made him nervous and shy around other people, but around Donnie, they both embraced it and sort of joked around with each other for it. Emmett and his friends would like to doo-wop under lampposts late at night. Doo-wopping was a harmonious blues and rhythm music genre that took the 1940s and 1950s by storm. Artists like Curtis Mayfield and Frankie Lyman were notoriously great in this form of music. Emmett was most likely the lead singer of his group, the kid who loved the spotlight, having all the eyes on him. But Mamie would look at these kids and knew that they weren't making it big time. They weren't making it to the big stage. You know what I mean? Quote, nobody could get it just right. It was the only time they were not in harmony. But this was the 50s, and music was in the air. It was everywhere. For this group of boys standing under a curbside spotlight, the music was off key. It was out of sync. It was perfect. On July 25th, 1954, Emmett would turn 13, and 5 months later, he would celebrate Christmas. Before his family would arrive, he would help Mamie with Japanese decorations around the house. His mother would reward him with $100, but instead of splurging the money on himself, Emmett took it upon himself to buy gifts for everyone else who showed up. Christmas for the Till family was magical. Mamie's Aunt Magnolia brought her signature pot of greens. Her Aunt Mamie brought white potato pie, and her mother Alma made the turkey, one she called a masterpiece. Mamie wrote that, quote, if Norman Rockwell had ever wanted to do a black family Christmas portrait, he could have turned to us that holiday season. Picture perfect and ready to be framed on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post. Emmett was gifted a black suit, white shirt, and dress shoes by his mother, and Jean brought him a white brim hat, a tie, and a gray coat. Emmett took influence after Jean and considered him a sharp dresser. Now, most of the pictures you see of Emmett were on this Christmas Day. He was leaning against his Philco television, a close-up of him in his new wide-brim hat, and in my opinion, the most memorable one of Emmett, a portrait of him next to his mother. Soon after, Mamie and Jean would become more closer as partners. After Christmas, the bills started to pile up, and Mamie needed assistance. Without hesitation, Emmett would tell Mamie that he would pay them off. He planned that he would take the streetcar into the city and see some creditors to pay for the bills. Mamie was uncertain about letting Emmett handle all of this financial work, but she took a deep breath, gave him $100 for the task, and let him handle it. And to really think that a mother would be comfortable letting her 13-year-old son take on this responsibility really, really speaks to the magnitude of their relationship. The next day at work, Mamie was still worried about what Bobo had done with the money. She thought of the possibility of him losing it, him miscalculating how much he had to pay, or him possibly being robbed. But all those thoughts would cease once she got home and saw a stack of bills and change from the $100 that she gave Emmett. The bills were all stamped with the word paid. Mamie knew in that moment her relationship with her son was increasing, and she was seeing that her son was molding more and more into a young man. As for Gene, he would become more familiar with Mamie's family, and they would welcome him in, especially her Aunt Magnolia. Her pot of greens, will always be his attraction, besides spending time with Emmett and Mamie. Mamie would take after Aunt Magnolia and start cooking for Gene, to which he favored as well. One day, when making dinner, Gene would compliment Mamie on the meal and joke around about marrying her. Now, considering that Gene was heavily attracted to Mamie, especially when they first met, there had to be some truth in that joke. I'm just saying. But Emmett would speak up and say that they weren't ready yet, as in telling Gene, "I'm not ready for you to marry my mom." Now, Mamie wrote that she was feeling stutter, really bad. Now, Mamie wrote that she was feeling ready herself to marry Gene, but she respected her son's choice. But Gene would constantly insist and joke, to which Emmett said the same thing. It was confusing to Gene as to why Bobo was so protective over his mom getting married. And finally, Gene asked Emmett why. Emmett would explain that he had no problem with Gene, but he was concerned and afraid about Gene possibly shouting at his mom or even harming her. Emmett was fully aware about Mamie's past with men, such as Pink Bradley, and we all know how Emmett dealt with that. He just didn't want his mom to step into an intimate situation that she wasn't prepared for. So it's completely justifiable as to why he felt that way. But Gene would begin to show Emmett that he was finally the right man for Mamie. So we are almost done with the contextual background on Mamie and Emmett Till and the rest of their family. But I want to point out just a few more stories before we end this episode. Emmett was a big thinker of his future and what he wanted to be when he grew up. One aspiration was obviously a baseball player. He was a big fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. I don't know why. Even though he was from Chicago, could have rooted for the White Sox, could have rooted for the Cubs. He was a big fan of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Another aspiration was a motorcycle cop, or even building a church for his grandmother. And that last part, that last part, church, God, Christianity, boom. That was a big part of Till's life. After moving in 1951 to Chicago, Emmett and Mamie would still be in close contact with Argo Temple Church of God in Christ. Now, a little fun fact: I attended Argo my freshman year. If anybody's watching that goes to Argo, and you probably see me my freshman year, big shout outs to you. And this is what I really found out about their life in Summit. I also attended the memorial that they held on April 29th. There's a little memorial poster in the school on, I think, one of the staircases that basically tells the story of Mamie and Emmett. A cool fact to point out: Argo Temple Church of God in Christ currently is actually led by Wheeler Parker Jr., who is now a reverend there. And it is about a 3-minute walk away from Argo Community High School, just a straight walk down from the side entrance. So, if you are hearing this podcast and you attend Argo, I highly suggest that you head down to Argo Temple Church of God in Christ for a Sunday service. Grandmother Alma actually founded this church in 1926, so there's a lot of family management and history here. Emmett will go each week, having almost perfect attendance. One day, while riding his new streetcar, which was a 1955 Plymouth, he rode with Benny Goodwin, the son of the Argo Temple pastor at the time. Goodwin baptized Mamie and was a student at the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago and choir director at Argo Temple. Let me slow down my reading for a little bit. My bad. Goodwin would recall his encounter with Emmett to his cousin Thelma Wright. Goodwin was studying for an exam when something in his conscience told him to strike up a conversation with Emmett. Around a certain point in this conversation, he asked Emmett if he wanted to pray. In that particular moment, Emmett would accept Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. Mamie wrote that, quote, when Emmett raised his head, he looked transformed. Goodwin would tell Thelma that the main reason why he could not focus on his exam and what he was doing was that the voice of God was urging him to talk to Emmett. Emmett would start 8th grade at James McCosh, and he would look forward to it. His friends at McCosh would describe him as a prankster. His principal, Curtis Melnick, would describe him as an average student and was never involved in any trouble. Emmett was very passionate and talented in art, science, and spelling, but school was Emmett's domain solely because of his social skills. Richard Hurd, his classmate, would tell PBS that Emmett would display jokes about his chubbiness, and he didn't let that stand in his way. Most of the guys at James McCosh were skinny, and Emmett stood out because of his size. Rich remembers Emmett in a very positive way, recalling times where Emmett invited him over to his house for bologna sandwiches and Kool-Aid. To basically recap everything about the Till family, we really learn about the harsh but inspirational upbringing of Mamie Till, her way of life, migrating from southern Mississippi to Chicago to find a better life for herself and for her son. Hold on. I'm sorry. Just had to clear my throat. We also covered a lot of stories about her having to defend her value and her image against other people, which really provided a lot of inspiration for me and really molded Mamie into the strong woman that we all know today. We learned about Mamie's family and key people in her life, such as her father, John Carthen, such as her mother, Alma Carthen, her first husband, Louis Till, her second husband, Lamorse Mallory, third husband, Pink Bradley, and fourth and final husband, Gene Mobley. For Emmett Till, we really got to learn about him as a Chicago youngster and as a human, not a martyr. His childhood, which included his bout with polio, his stutter, his infectious personality, his relationship with not only his mother, but extended family and friends as well, his passions and hobbies as a 14-year-old living in Chicago through personal experiences and other accounts really gives us a new perspective of who Emmett Louis Till was. So now with the contextual background about Emmett and Mamie Till done, let's speak about our last topic, which I will shorten. I will not include the incident at Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. I will leave that up to the next episode. This is about the events leading up to that moment at Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. Here we go. In August of 1955, Mose Wright, a preacher and sharecropper, would visit Chicago. Like mentioned earlier in the episode, he was the great uncle of Emmett and was born in Lexington, Mississippi. Wright was an ordained minister in the Church of God in Christ and was nicknamed Preacher. He lived his entire life in the Mississippi Delta and owned around 25 acres of cotton behind his house on the Grover C. Frederick Plantation. The house contained 4 bedrooms with a screened-in porch out front. The Wright House is well spoken of by North Carolinian historian Timothy B. Tyson. Quote, its tin roof sloped toward the persimmon and cedar trees, that lined the dusty road out front. Wright was in town for the funeral of his daughter Willie Mae's father-in-law. He explored many sites in Chicago, like the Merchandise Mart, Downtown Loop, and the Tribune Tower, but Wright held his heart close to Mississippi. He spoke with pride, and he spoke with joy of his life there, including some rivers like the Yazoo, Sunflower, and the Yallabusha, some rivers that passed by his house on Dark Ferry Road. Emmett had learned that Mose invited both Wheeler Parker and Curtis Jones, his grandsons, to go to Mississippi with them. Now, with this stipulation in mind, it's impossible to stop someone like Emmett from going. His cousin and best friend going away for a while was something that Emmett couldn't bear, and he begged his mother to let him go. Initially, she immediately turned it down, aware of what Mississippi was like. Mamie had other plans, like letting Emmett ride his favorite Plymouth in Nebraska, but Emmett was still insisting on going to Mississippi. Alma was also aware and was on the same boat as Mamie, but more people kept telling Mamie that Emmett was okay to go. Mamie knew that Mississippi took offense to people just like Emmett, and she knew of cautionary tales that took place there. One tale involved a young black girl who was playing with a white girl at the house of the family that employed the black girl's mother. The mother had cooked, cleaned, and did laundry for the family. And suddenly, the white girl got upset with the black girl and ran to her father to tell him as he pulled into the house. Now, we don't know what upset the white girl. We don't know what happened. But the father got visibly upset, confronted the black girl, and snatched her up and threw her against a tree. The mother of the black girl was not able to check on her daughter, who was in agonizing pain. When she could, the black girl had unfortunately died as a result of her injuries. It was stories like this that haunted Mamie, and she never knew whether this story was true or not. But it verbally displayed the reality of where she came from and the environment Emmett was about to step into. Now, Illinois was not a utopia for black families either. Black children in Argo were still prohibited from entering restaurants without being accompanied by an adult. The mindset of still not making conversation with white folk or cutting through predominantly white neighborhoods were still instilled in black children's minds. Mamie would go and talk to Uncle Mose and Willie Mae about this, and in the midst of the conversation, be so persuaded that she would let Emmett go. But, under one condition, that Mose stay with him everywhere they went. Mose promised this. So, the trip to Mississippi was set, and Mamie needed to do one more. So, the trip to Mississippi was set, but Mamie needed to do one more thing before she left. Give the pep talk to Emmett. The pep talk that most black mothers gave to their black children about racism. The one that they still give today. Mamie would tell Emmett not to start any conversations with any white person, no matter what the cost. If he were to see a white person on the sidewalk, move off the sidewalk and bow your head, and don't even risk looking at that person. If Emmett were to mess up on any of these lessons while in Mississippi, Mamie told him to get on his knees and beg for forgiveness. Yikes. This is what I was talking about. This is what I mentioned in the Mississippi Delta when I told you about the Negro Law. I think it was the Negro Law. Yeah, I think it was. Where you needed to lower your self-value just for the sake of survival. This is what I was telling you guys. It's just ridiculous, man. It really is ridiculous. Mamie told him to address every white individual as either ma'am or sir. No first name or nickname. Nothing else. If he were to answer a white person that was speaking to him, only in the form of yes sir, no sir, and yes ma'am, and no ma'am. It's understandable that Mamie told Bobo these lessons to this extent because in the environment that he was entering, where just a few weeks prior to his arrival, 2 black activists would be shot dead for fighting for voting rights. It was so prevalent that Mississippi was no joke, but Emmett had some recollection of racism while living in Illinois. I assume Mamie could have told him about the Red Summer Race Riot in 1919 or how Eugene Williams, a 17-year-old African-American boy, was killed after drifting his raft into a portion of water marked white territory. Chicago was racist, but Mississippi was statistically much, much worse. After going shopping for Emmett to get him some new clothes for Mississippi, Emmett had noticed his father's signet ring in his jewelry box. At a much younger age, Emmett had failed to make the ring fit, but now it was perfect for his sizing. This would then bring up a few questions out of Emmett about who his father was and some questions surrounding his death. Mamie could only tell him about the basics of what happened. She wrote, quote, "The only thing I could tell him at that point was the only thing I was told by the Army, and that was the willful misconduct thing." On August 20th, 1955, Mose Wright and Wheeler Parker was planning to leave from the Central Street Station. Mamie and her friend Mary Lee, who was visiting from St. Louis, were going to take Emmett to Wright and Parker to drop him off, but Mamie was behind on schedule. She decided to take Emmett to the Inglewood train station at 63rd and Woodlawn since they lived closer to there. She cooked Emmett some lunch to take with him, which included fried chicken, cake, and some other treats before he left. Even with switching train stations, Mamie and Emmett were still running late. With only a few moments to spare, Emmett arrived and ran up the steps to board the train, rushing and almost forgetting about his mother. She was standing at the platform when she yelled out for Emmett, quote, "Bo, you didn't kiss me goodbye. How do I know I'll ever see you again?" Emmett sort of looked disappointed that she would say something like that, but he ran down the steps and gave her a kiss. He removed his watch and gave it to her, saying that he didn't need it where he was going. He kept the signet ring and told her that he was going to show it to the guys. That being said, Emmett darted up towards the train, barely catching it. Moses recalled, quote, if he'd been 5 minutes later, he'd have missed it. Mamie would return home and lay in bed, overwhelmed with anxiety and uncertainty about the decision she had just made. Mamie never estimated the magnitude of this decision until 2 weeks later, wounded with grief at the fact that her son had died. Mamie would write to end her 11th chapter in her autobiography, quote, I once had a moment with Emmett. It was the moment of a lifetime. It was the moment of decision. And balanced on that moment was the tension of motherhood. Two sides of myself at odds. The part of me that longed to provide everything for my son's happiness. The part of me that desperately needed to protect him, even at the cost of his happiness. Strange how before that, I had thought these two parts of myself were one and the same. What if I had paused at that point for just a moment longer and let the other side of me win and let Emmett lose? How long would his disappointment have lasted? A moment maybe. I would have a lifetime to consider all that. One moment at a time. In just 2 weeks, the world will have to meet Emmett Till in a grotesque manner. Mamie will have to return to the Inglewood station to pick her son up, surrounded by media outlets and grieving families. The impact of one decision, of love, and of motherly generosity. It hurts. And for Emmett Till, his murder would take place in statistically the worst state for African Americans to live in. The state in where people his complexion were hunted and gunned down for white families to laugh at and seize as proud accomplishment. The most southern place ever, the Mississippi Delta. For episode 2, we are going to discuss the murder that impacted millions. We are going to discuss a murder in which woke up a nation. It's very crazy to think that like so many little choices in this sequence of events would impact so much. I think it's called the butterfly effect, especially considering that Mamie had also had second thoughts about letting her son Emmett go to Mississippi, and that she even purposefully, probably wanted to maybe delay or kind of hold back a little bit and possibly be late so that her son wouldn't go. But it's like, for the sake of your son's happiness, it like Mamie had always wanted her son to be happy. Mamie had always wanted Emmett to enjoy life. She always wanted Emmett to experience life for what it was. And it's so sad to see that, it cost her something. It cost her son's life. It cost her just years, or it caused her just years and years and years of pain and just sorrow from this. This took a long time to make. You obviously are going to notice that I changed attires throughout the day. That's because it took multiple days for me to finish. I really hope you guys enjoy. I tried to include everything that I could about like just Mamie's life, about Emmett's life. I tried to include a lot about the Mississippi Delta to kind of give you guys a setting on where Emmett was stepping into. This was, for the most part, just hell on earth for a lot of African Americans. The fact that you had to look over your shoulder every time you went somewhere, the fact that you couldn't just walk freely, is a scary thing to really conceive. It's a scary thing to be aware of, but these African Americans had dealt with it their entire lives. The fact that you couldn't, even enjoy certain hobbies, just little hobbies, like going to certain parks or playing in certain gyms because they were, segregated. It really does hurt to think about something like that. But that was the environment that Emmett was stepping into, and it was 10 times worse. Um, so for episode 2, I really just want to get into the incident at Brian's grocery and meat market, the murder, and then the funeral, and then for episode 3, get into the aftermath and then the impact. Well, no, for episode 3, the trial, the aftermath, and then the impact. And that's really going to sum up everything about the life and legacy of Emmett Till. I really hope you guys enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I'm Bryce Barnett. I am the host of What's Bryce Talking About Now. Yeah, you can follow me on WBTAN podcast on Instagram. I am going to be releasing some clips and just a whole lot of like media about this certain series on social media. Yeah, really hope you guys enjoy, and catch you on episode 2.